Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Elephants. I'm your host, Destiny Farley, and today I'm interviewing Glen Simpson, Senior Director at Community Ambulance. Community Ambulance is the leading EMS provider in Southern Nevada and is responsible for over 60% of all 911 responses in Clark County. Glen has been a part of the EMS community since 2004, and I asked him to come on the show today because of a conversation we had last year about mental health in the EMS community. As first responders, EMTs and paramedics are often the first people on the scene to some pretty traumatic calls, and they dedicate their entire lives to serving their community in this way. That being said, even though they receive proper training and resources to deal with these scenarios, they're still human beings, and human beings are emotional beings that are impacted by these situations. First responders of all kinds have to bear the emotional weight of witnessing tragedy on a daily basis, and Glen has agreed to discuss some of the challenges of navigating this type of career. So Glen, can you please just take a moment to briefly introduce yourself and share what initially led you to the EMS community?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Glen Simpson, Senior Director at Community Ambulance. I've been fortunate to be a part of EMS since 2004 out here in Southern Nevada. It's where I've spent my entire career. It's not what I wanted to do originally. I've always been in a position where I've wanted to help people. That was really kind of my goal. And initially, right out the gate, it was, okay, what can I do in a short period of time to really engage and then be able to start helping people? And at the time, I was connected very heavily to my church, and there was somebody who was working for one of the ambulance companies out here, and she had asked if I wanted to go on a ride along. And for me, growing up, I was the kid that always watched, everything from like Rescue 911 to Trauma, Life in the ER, more the real shows as opposed to the non-reality type dramas. And for me, it was, that experience of, truthfully being able to, turn your lights on, turn your sirens on, and just what that came with and how rewarding that was. It began this career path for me. So while I was doing that, I was still pursuing my education and ended up getting my bachelor's at UNLV in kinesiology. From there, just continued to have opportunities where I was working and just began to kind of grow and really grow with the city. I spent some time out on a truck for a little period of time. When I first got started in the business, I would just primarily go and cover events because it's kind of what you do as a newer EMT. That's where you get plugged in at. And for me, it was, I always gravitated back towards those events, for various reasons. Everything from you got to meet really cool people, no 2 days were alike, got to see some really cool concerts that, for free, basically. Lots of just, it was just a world that I always kind of gravitated back towards. And so the company that I was working for at the time allowed for those opportunities to grow. And for me to really kind of get involved in my community and interact with folks. And fast forward to 2016, I left a previous organization and had an opportunity at Community Ambulance. It was a very small company at the time, roughly about 100 employees. And now fast forward to 2024, where we have nearly 700 employees. So for me, it was always just really being able to help people and be able to watch people grow. And as I've grown into the career and as I've been able to experience medicine, it's even opened my eyes to exactly what I want to do to help people. And it's not necessarily, being the one that shows up on a call and starts the IV and gives the life-saving medication. It's more, how can I help somebody in just a not so great situation? And I think that ranges from somebody's worst day all the way down to just navigating something so much more simple. So that's really for me kind of where EMS has led me and kind of why I've always just really kind of stayed involved with it.
Yeah, there's like a ton of research in psychology on the mental health benefits, ironically, of serving your community and of doing volunteer work and of helping other human beings. So you've kind of known since you were young that you have like this desire to serve other people.
Yeah, I think like for me, it's everything from my personal life to just my professional. Like in my personal life, like I'm the one that wants to go celebrate people's birthdays. I'm the one that wants to, give gifts during Christmas. So like for me, I've just kind of, it was the way I was raised, and it's something that just for me was who I was, and professionally in my career, being able to introduce somebody to this career or introduce somebody to the different tricks of the trade, so to speak. That for me has always been being able to just help people. That's what I've always been driven to.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. Would you say that you're like an emotional person? Like there's negative connotations attached to that, so I don't want to say it like everybody's emotional. It's a human thing. But do you feel a lot of times like the colloquialism is like an empath? Like, do you feel like you connect deeply to people, or you feel their pain a lot? Like, is that rooted in your desire to serve, or what do you think drives that desire to serve other people?
Yeah, answering the question if I'm an emotional person, like I feel like that question in itself is such a bigger question than what that question is. Just how you interact with people, how you respond to situations. And then, when I sit here and say that you have to be in a position to help people, there's there's certain situations where you have to be, I guess, tough, or you have to be in a completely different mindset to then emotionally connect with people. But I think for me, I think I've always emotionally connected with people, even just professionally, like in my personal life, dating life. Like for me, it's just always been more of an emotional connection as opposed to a physical connection. And I think, I think emotionally, I think there's varying levels of emotion. And to your point, how people respond or just how you listen, and just, I think the makeup of who you are, and as you grow and as you interact with more people, that your emotions shift, or your emotions changed, and how well you begin to listen to people, or how more receptive you become to things, or on the flip side of it, like how accustomed or how numb you become to certain scenarios or certain situations that you might face or might be put in, and then how you then interact with those.
Yeah, I guess that question is rooted in like there's certain people that pursue this career path. Not everybody has a desire to go out and dedicate their lives to helping other people. It takes a certain kind of person, and I think that someone who's willing to dedicate their life to do that is naturally a more selfless person, a more considerate person, and that's rooted in being able to connect with other people and experience their emotions or their situations, even if you're not living it yourself. And that's, I guess, by definition, what an empath is just being able to literally feel what other people are experiencing without experiencing it yourself. And so that's why I asked that, because you have to have somewhat of a connection to people in general to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to spend my whole life helping other people. Because there's people that go out and, no shame, someone's got to do it, but run businesses or are more, kind of more like sharks, more like self-serving and out to make a bunch of money, or like they just have different goals, So that's why I asked if you consider yourself more of like an empath or an emotional person, I guess.
Yeah, no, like I think, I think all of us were put on this earth to, one, and I tell people this all the time, like, because we do talk about the bad in the world, we talk about the negative in the world. And like, for me, I truly believe deep down that 99% of people on this earth are good people, and that we all want to get along. We all want to work together. And there's, I think like early on in my career, even just from, being promoted and being put in, being thrown into leadership positions, that you expected people to act a certain way, or you expected people to act the way you acted.
Yep.
Or, because I'm in the trench, you have to be in the trench. And I think as I've progressed and as I've kind of grown into this and just grown up, you realize that that's not what's needed. So when I talk about like just varying levels of emotion, I think with that comes different levels of emotion, or we can go down this path of talking about like emotional intelligence. And
right.
I could sit here and tell you that my emotional intelligence, like up until a very short period of time ago, just sucked. Like I just didn't.
Really?
Yeah, I just didn't have it. Like it was.
I find that hard to believe. I don't know.
I'm very much one of those people that wears my emotions on me and on my sleeve.
I see.
So
okay.
For me, when I talk emotional intelligence, that's kind of what I mean by that. In that I let on too easy.
Yeah, the
sometimes.
regulating part wasn't there.
Yeah,
Much.
right. And just trying to learn that, and not because that's a sign of weakness. Kind of going back to that whole, how you express emotions. Like, yeah, I very much would express emotions, and if you got me in a room or in a space where I felt safe, you're gonna see my emotions more than maybe others will, or the extreme of that, when you begin to just act out because you just have so much that you just need to get off your chest or just need to process that you haven't processed properly. I think for me, that's been part of the journey too, is just realizing that you give. And, just for me, like even on I primarily work Monday through Friday, but by the time the weekend gets there, like I've given of myself so much that then I get into home life and I just have nothing to give. Like that's just kind of been removed. And so it's really like, even for me, like in my current state, it's navigating that balance and navigating that, how do I continue to give, continue to serve, continue to support and be there, but at the same time, make sure that I'm taking care of myself. And It sounds like a really simple process or a simple answer, but I think that in itself is a journey. At least for me, it's a journey. And I'm, I don't know if I would even gauge it as saying I'm halfway there or 3/4 of the way there, but it's certainly just a journey that one week you feel right, another week can come and you're like, okay, I'm not processing this the way I need to process it.
Yeah, I don't even feel like you can measure it because there's not like a finish line.
Right.
It's just like your whole life, it's learning just how to be a decent human. And like that's a part of that is regulating your emotions, how you interact with the people that matter in your life, things like that, And we'll kind of get into that later on, how you balance work and home life and, remain emotionally present for the other people in your life. But before we do that, I kind of want to talk to you about some of the calls that you guys experience when it comes to EMS and paramedics. Do you remember what like your first really tough call was? Like if I know that a lot of them might be, I mean, I don't even know what like a regular call would look like. If it's like an elderly person that has fallen, or, it's someone that got too high and thinks that they're having that they're dying. But, you might get a lot of those. Do you remember like, even if it wasn't your first really tough call, but like one of the hardest calls that you had to respond to that really like made an impact on you and that you had to kind of sit with for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a misconception in what EMTs and paramedics respond to, right? So many years ago, I don't even remember the exact year, but we decided in our country that we were going to create this 3-digit number. And all you had to do, no matter the emergency, pick up the phone and dial 911 and help would arrive, right? And so, often what I tell people is when we talk about EMS in Las Vegas, for example, then you really only know EMS in Las Vegas. And what I mean by that is our systems are so unique across the country that, I've had the opportunity to see other operations or interact with leaders in other operations and really, just the different types of calls, how resources are utilized on a daily basis. It all just kind of varies. I say all that because EMS in Las Vegas is the moment you dial 911, you get a fire department resource, and then you get a private ambulance company. And now as a provider that's, providing resources to over half of just the county, we're, averaging upwards of 300 to 350 calls per day. Of that, roughly about 275 to 300 of those people are being transported to the hospital. So there's a lot of calls. There's a lot of call volume. When you start doing the math throughout the year, we're talking hundreds of thousands of calls for people that just want help. And they're calling for everything, right? So they're calling for, I stubbed my toe, to I just saw somebody get in a car accident, to they stopped breathing, to you name it, right? My kid's drowning, whatever it is. Like it's just an array of situations that can occur. And again, we've trained society that in the event of an emergency, again, define emergency, but in the event of your emergency, pick up the phone and call 911. And so our providers are really seeing just an array of things. When you decide to get into this career and jump into it and kind of, stick your toes in it, you certainly, there's really no sensitive way of saying this, but you want to see the quote unquote cool calls. You want to see the traumas. You want to, you want to see the sickness, not because you want to see people hurt or in really bad situations, but it's just that, I think it's a combination of things. It's the adrenaline, it's the, it's a myriad of things that want you to do that or see that. And which is weird that you would want that or desire that, or that you would even have that thought, because of the damage that it ultimately is doing and that repetitive damage that it's doing.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, the calls that we're running are very repetitive. It's not uncommon to run a call where somebody's just having trouble breathing. It's not uncommon to run a call where somebody called because they have flu-like symptoms. And those calls in themselves can be very taxing on you. They can be very just frustrating in some ways. When I think when you're in the medical field, the chances of you ever calling 911, the chances of you walking into the emergency room are very low. I think that, I've seen memes out there where I'm a paramedic or I'm a doctor, you're just not going to go see a doctor because we're just going to cure it at home, or we're going to deal with it at home. Whereas, again, society has really just been driven to pick up the phone, call 911, and we're going to navigate it. And so that's a lot of what our providers are doing every single day, every single moment, is they're navigating, these calls, not knowing what they're going to walk into. A lot of scenes are dynamic, meaning there's a law enforcement element, there may be a fire element, and then there's a medical element, and no two calls truly are alike. Now, we do run calls on people that, unfortunately, they, call 911 a lot, and they have their reasons for that, right, wrong, or indifferent, but those type of calls become very repetitive on somebody, on a provider. For me, memorable call-wise, I remember, early on in my career, people would be like, "What's the coolest thing that you have ever seen?" And it was always a weird question.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use coolest.
Right?
But...
I don't, but there's certainly, for me, there's memorable. I think probably for me, one of the, and memorable in different respects, right? Because I think people get into this career for various reasons. People get into it, I think everybody gets into it because, to your point that you made earlier, they do want to serve people. I think that's the foundation of it all. If you're not in the business of wanting to serve people, or you just don't have that mindset or that heart or whatever you want to call it, then you're just not going to flourish in this career, and it's just not going to work. But I think people get into it for various reasons. They get into it because they do want to be doctors. They want to be firefighters. They want to be, or they really don't know what they want, but they want to serve people from this kind of standpoint. And so I think, what is most memorable to me might be more memorable to somebody else because of the type of call. Some people love medicine, and so seeing that patient that just kind of had everything going on, for lack of a better description, and you had to sit there and solve it, right? Because that's what we're doing every day, is we're playing detective. Sure, we get a little bit of information. The one that I try to, tell brand new people in this business is you can never have your blinders on when it comes to treating patients. For example, you may respond to a call and you're going to ask, it's very common for us to ask if you have any medical history, if you take any medications. And so you'll ask if they have medical history, and they'll come back and say no. So you'll move on and ask, did you take any medications? Because no matter what, I'm still going to ask those questions. And you'll get patients that will come back and give you this laundry list of medications. Medications that treat high blood pressure, medications that treat psychotic issues. And you look at them and say, no medical history? And they're stuck on, nope, no medical history. And so you're having to play detective. And for some people, that in itself is what drives them, is playing that detective piece and really trying to figure out what's going on with that patient, and figuring out, for example, how that illness interacts with those medications, or those medications interact with this. It's a puzzle. It's a big, giant puzzle. And then there's people that, just from a trauma standpoint, you get to, experience different traumatic calls, whether that's a vehicle car collision, whether that's, whatever it is. And for me, my first, most memorable call, there's two of them, both happen to be trauma driven, but one of them was, believe it or not, in Las Vegas, there are trains and there's train tracks, and a homeless man had been hit by the train. And I'll never forget it, more from I think, holy crap, that just happened, but he had been clipped by the train, sucked underneath the train, And mind you, these trains are really heavy.
Right.
Even though they appear to move at a low speed, they're still moving, 20 to 30 miles per hour. And his legs were severed off. And then the rest of his body was drug, about 500 to 1,000 feet down the track. And so that just, when you pull up on that, when you get the call that comes across, your computer saying that you're responding to this, you're like, wait, we have trains out in Las Vegas, and you start putting all these pieces together to try to figure out, like, okay, what's going on, and then you get there, and no, in fact, somebody had been hit by a train, and so for me, that was, I don't know why, but even till this day, and that was very early on in my career, and 20 years later, like, I still remember like that call. Another one was another trauma, and for me, it was a jewelry store, and there's certain components of that day that I won't forget. It was a really busy day, and what people don't often understand is that eating, restroom, those are all kind of secondary. And if there's an opportunity and a time for you to get those in, that's when you get them in. It's not uncommon to get a meal and be able to take a bite or two. It's not uncommon to walk into a place, order some food, get a call, and either try to get your money back, or it's going to take too long, so you don't get your money back and you just leave. And there's been times where you make your way back to that restaurant and see if you can get the food. Other times you're just out of luck, and it's because the calls will always take precedence, will always take priority. But this particular call, I remember we were standing in line getting lunch, and we had not eaten all day. And so there was a part of us that were like, we're not moving. Like, we're staying here. We're going to get food. It was a sandwich place, and the call came across as a shooting. Well, the adrenaline naturally kind of starts flowing on that, because exciting is not the right word, but it's a dynamic scene, and you want to get there, and you kind of just start putting all the pieces together. And this particular one was a jewelry store, and it was right before Christmas, and the jewelry store had been robbed. And the store owner happened to, obviously we learned some of these facts after, but the store owner had come in to take the money, take it to the bank. The jewelry store was not open on this particular day. He went in, somebody followed him in, robbed him point blank. Instead of just allowing the suspects to take his money, he decided to chase them. When he engaged them, they turned around and they shot him point blank. And so we arrive on scene to this individual that had been shot point blank, been shot in the face and the chest a few times, and he was dead. But it was a very surreal scene. Everything kind of moved really slowly. I would describe it as what you see in in a movie where the change and the money scattered everywhere. That's exactly what you saw with this. And again, a really fast, dynamic scene. But those two probably were the most memorable. For me, probably the most memorable call in my entire career will be the 1 October incident, the mass shooting that occurred here in Las Vegas, for various reasons. One, 5, 6 years, 7 years later, still, processing components of that. But like the things that I saw that night in just that short period of time, I think those right there, that's probably the most, that night is certainly the most memorable. And even really odd details of that night are still very fresh for me from that night.
Was it, I guess, for any of those calls, did you struggle mentally with those calls for a long time afterwards, after you saw them? Did they take a toll on you?
Yeah, I think you're taught, I don't think you're taught. Indirectly, you learn in this business that we're in the business of helping people. We're in the business of answering the call. We're in the business of answering the next call. And I keep saying business because there is a business component to all this. Yes, these are human beings, but there's a component where my job is to get on scene, assess you, begin treating you, take you to the hospital, and do that again throughout the day. I think where, and then we're taught just to move on to the next one, right? And I keep saying taught, but you're not taught. We don't sit in a class and they're like, all right, you're going to run this call, forget everything about it, and move on to the next call. As a matter of fact, most EMT programs do touch on mental health. I think there's still a lot of, we don't know how to touch on it, or how do you have those conversations with an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old as opposed to a 30 to 35-year-old, right? I think there's different ways to approach that conversation. I think there's life experience that carves that conversation. And so I think, part of the reason they're so memorable is realizing that in an instant, in the blink of an eye, those people's lives were changed. Right. And don't know their story. We'll never know their story because those two, calls I share, they both were dead. Right. And so you'll never even know their story or ever connect those dots, nor are we in the business of connecting those dots. Right. It's not uncommon at all for us to take somebody to the hospital if they pass away, or if we don't take them to the hospital because they're already dead, that's it. Like, you move on and you move on to the next one. So I think that's where, like, you see this almost kind of this mental trauma and you start storing it. 1 October, I think you start storing it, right? Like, there's sounds that I still remember, there's smells that I remember, there's visuals that I remember, there's conversations I remember that night. And then, even kind of as time continues to move, like, you almost kind of start learning other pieces about it, or you start interacting with people that, they were on scene as well, just in a different capacity, and you just never connected the two. And I think so yeah, I think, I don't know what makes them so memorable, or how to process it, or did it bother you later on. 1 October certainly could tell you that as maybe as fresh as it is, still kind of affects. But for me, it's always going back to just the way, again, being selfless, the way their lives were changed. Not necessarily my life, but the way their lives were changed in those moments.
That's where being an empath comes in too. In communications and in psychology more broadly, we learn about how negative things are just more salient. They just stick out to the human mind because it becomes a survival thing, because our brains are wired to recognize negative or scary or anxiety or anything like that, because we're designed to get away from them. So 1 October, the Route 91 festival really impacted me more than I thought it was going to, because I didn't have anyone that I knew very closely that was there. My parents usually went to that, but they weren't there that year. And I knew people that knew people, because it's the biggest mass shooting in U.S. history, like on U.S. territory.
Yeah.
So there were tons of people that were affected. I do know some people that either were injured or shot. I don't know anyone personally that had passed away. I know people that have someone that passed away. But having been born and raised here and lived here my whole life, it really kind of fucked me up more than I thought it would. And it hits you in ways that you don't expect. I remember it was just this heavy feeling in my chest, I cannot believe that just happened in my hometown, and it was like a collective trauma. I don't know, there's definitely some term out there in psychology for it, but as a city, as a community, we felt it. And I remember just being I felt helpless. I felt like I couldn't do anything to make a difference. I wanted to go give blood, but so many people were giving blood. There was a wait even to give blood. And I remember just feeling that event actually. So I was raised Catholic. I was confirmed Catholic. I wasn't uber religious or anything, but I had a relationship with God. And I was struggling with it through high school. And that event had pushed me to borderline be atheist. I was almost atheist after that had happened, because I was how old was I? This is 2017. I would have been 18, I think. And so I remember as an 18-year-old thinking there's no way something like this could happen if there was a God. Why, if there's a God, would something like this be allowed to even be possible? If he loves us, everything I had learned about God from a Catholic perspective, him being unconditionally loving and sending his only son, sacrificing it, I struggled because I couldn't comprehend the trauma. And I wasn't even there. I didn't even see it, But you're seeing footage online. You're seeing, you're hearing the stories. And like as someone who's an empath, I felt like I was feeling it, and I just felt like kind of hopeless and useless, and I just went into like a dark place after that. And if it affected me that way, I cannot even imagine like seeing something like that. It's probably similar to what, people in the military experience, or people that are like in active combat, like when they see things like that and how it gives them PTSD, and you can't clear images like that out of your head. When most human beings, aren't witnessing the loss of life on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The one time I've seen someone lose their life is watching my grandpa pass in hospice, which is, it's still traumatic. It's a fairly normal human experience, but to witness it in that way, like in mass and frequently, like that has to alter your brain chemistry in some way. Like how did you struggle with mental health at all before you started this job? Like anxiety, depression, anything like that?
I don't. I'm gonna say no.
Okay.
And I say that more from I guess a medical standpoint, right? Like I wasn't seeing a doctor, I wasn't prescribed any particular medications. Didn't mean that I wasn't dealing with demons of my own or anything like that. And I would, in hindsight, I would assume that the struggles that we experience in high school are quote unquote normal. So those moments in high school where you just thought life was not worth it or just the end, like I think you process that. I'm also very much a person where like I don't even know how to describe it, but when I look at anything, like I need to know everything about it. I need to know how it's going to happen, how it's going to end, everything in between. Okay, if it's going to go 14 different ways, and I'm going to explore those 14 different avenues. And so I think even like just growing up, and then just from a mental health standpoint, like you sit there and you start questioning it, and you're like, okay, wait, did I have mental health struggles? Did I not have mental health struggles? And even after 1 October, like obviously I still remember. I remember that night, and there was different dynamics. Like eventually I had sought help, because what I found was I was suppressing a lot of it, and I was suppressing it, I think, for a handful of reasons. One, I was in a leadership role that night, and so there was some guilt that I'm the one that assigned those. It was what 16 of us. So I was the one that assigned those 15 other people to work that event. I was the one that told those 15 people, come to work on this Sunday, be here at this time, we're going to do this, right? And so you automatically, like you just, had it not been for me, they wouldn't have even been there, kind of thing, right? And then I think, and I'm kind of hopping around here, but one of the things that happened that night was, so many things were happening that night, but once it occurred, all these pieces started moving, like at our operation. And one of those pieces was, one, getting a hold of everybody that was there. During that time, I believe there was 2 employees that we could not get a hold of. So you're dealing with that. Simultaneously, we're putting out this all call to tell people to come in, because really we didn't know the magnitude of it. For me, that was something, like even after, like not understanding, like driving home that morning, driving down the boulevard and seeing like news trucks, like you knew it was a big deal, but you didn't realize how big of a deal it was, or how global of a deal it was. And then, going home and turning TV on and just seeing more and more of it. But even, it got to a point that night where we were calling all these people to come in, and our workforce didn't hesitate. Like they showed up in droves, like to our office, like half dressed, still getting dressed, whatever. They knew they just needed to get there. They needed to get in an ambulance. They needed to get down there. But it got to the point that we had too many people, and there wasn't a job for them to do. There wasn't a role for them to do. And so we sent those people home. And you talk about, not being there and the guilt that you had. Imagine the guilt that they had, because we told them to come in, or, we put out this all call, and now we told them to go home, And so that took some time just to process, right? Because again, no, I wasn't directly involved in that, but indirectly, like those are my peers, those are my colleagues. Like I can only imagine the impact that was having. And so, I think, collectively that night, obviously you're running on adrenaline. People talk about, it being similar to war. And one of our paramedics that we had there that night had done, I'll say multiple tours because I don't remember the exact count, but he had done multiple tours in Iraq and was out in some pretty harsh conditions. And when people had compared this incident to being in war, he said, no, like, I'll never forget this. He said, in war, he said, we had ballistic gear on, we had weapons to defend ourselves. Like, this was worse than war. Like, we literally were fish in a fishbowl. Like, we were sitting ducks is literally what we were that night. Not realizing it, not realizing where the shooting's coming from, not realizing so many different components, how dynamic the situation was. So, I think for some of our providers, that was their first exposure to this industry. And then I think for others that were there, they had been doing it for a little bit of time. And I even, like, for me, I'd been doing it for a little bit of time at this point, 2017. So just trying to process all that, like, it took time to really even just start talking about it, right? Because then, at what point are you weak? At what point are you going to be judged by how you feel? At what point are your thoughts not equal to or not as important as the next person's thoughts? Like, all these things that sitting here, we can say, well, that's stupid. Like, of course people give a fuck about you and care about this stuff, but in those moments, you didn't realize that. And I think that right there is, I think, one of many challenges when it comes to first responders and mental health is that, yes, we talk about this outlet. Yes, we talk about debriefing after serious calls. And I think we do it in a roundabout way. But there's a lot of humor. There's a lot of dark humor that exists in our industry. There's just, because you just want to process it and you just want to move on and you don't want to be judged by your peers. And when you're young in this industry, when you're young in society, I think you're just surrounded by that, right? You feel in this world, you just feel like you're being judged no matter what you do, what you wear, what you eat, how you party, how you don't party, whatever it is, right? Your sexuality, whatever it is, you just feel like you're being judged. And then I think there's this moment in life where it shifts. Like, I feel like for me, like in the past few years, that has shifted. And I don't want to say I don't care what people think, but you begin to understand, like, I don't even know if I understand it, but you begin to feel like I don't care what other people think. And so my emotions are my emotions, my feelings are my feelings, and I can express them the way I want to express them. And understanding that there's help out there to help you navigate that. For me personally, seeking help, I don't know if it helped me the way I thought it was going to help me. But it certainly took me down a path of listening to somebody talk about how they were going to help. And here's some steps that we're going to do, right? Because maybe it's just me, maybe it's just being in medicine. Like, when you're sick, you want, give me something to make me feel better, right? And so my mental health is sick. Give me something to make me feel better. And we've advanced so much in that field, right? I have anxiety, I have a mental illness, I'm bipolar, whatever it is, there's medications that fix that. Right. But when it comes to, I guess, trauma or mental trauma or just that, there's not I can't give you a pill. I can't give you a shot. I can't just sit here and tell you it's all going to be okay. It's something that you have to process and something that you have to journey down on.
That's one thing that I feel like I have realized, like, from personal experience and just from, having conversations with other people, is kind of the mark of having, like, a mental health disorder, right? Because it's the internal dialogue you have with yourself about trauma or about hard times or about whatever the case is, about anxiety. And it's this feeling that, like, you're never going to beat it, or like that you are your trauma, or that life is not worth living, or that everything is bad because that one thing was bad. And it becomes like a spiraling thing. And now I can say with confidence that I definitely have like mental health disorders, right? Like I've struggled with anxiety and depression. I didn't know for a while because like you said, I couldn't quite tell what was a normal response, if I'm just more of like an empathetic person, so I just feel things more than other people, if that's what it is. I couldn't tell. But recently I got on medication, I got on Zoloft, and that's how I know that I was like mentally ill because of the difference. And I didn't even want to get on medication. I really didn't because,
all the reasons.
all the reasons,
Nobody
big
wants
pharma,
to.
like
100%. Yeah.
right. The effect that it has on your brain chemistry, all these things. So I fought it hard. But I got to a point where, like in total transparency, I almost checked into a psychiatric hospital. I had talked to them about it. The only reason I didn't stay is because the program that they were offering made me feel like it was going to make me want to kill myself more. And I don't like group therapy. You're basically in like a hospital room by yourself. It's basically just babysitting so you don't kill yourself,
Sure.
is what it is.
Yeah.
Which is not what I needed at that time. I needed to feel like there was someone who could save me from my thoughts, from myself. And we don't have like an advanced enough like medical system here, I feel like.
But I think that's part of one of our biggest challenges is, and then finding that person that you can match with, right? Like it's, I don't mean to make light of it, but when it goes to selling your house or buying your house, like, and you use a realtor, like you're typically going to associate with somebody that you either know that does it or some sort of recommendation of somebody that you can feel comfortable with. And, as it's an important transaction in life, but like with mental health, like I feel you look at your insurance, here's your plan, here's who's you're able to go see, or you go to, a mental hospital where they can, evaluate you and then put you in these group settings. But it's then just finding that person that you can connect with. And I think that was my big challenge was I thought I was going to be able to connect with this person. And there's just like, I'm just sitting there like, I'm not this crazy. Like, no, it's not this bad. I think I need this. I don't think I need this. And, but yeah, like that marker of here, take this and realizing that, oh, I just needed that. Or, I think there's still so many mental health issues out there that don't necessarily require medication, but we just don't know how to process it. And I think, for me, like defining mental health illness is we certainly can, again, this is the science in me, is we can run a test and determine that serotonin levels are low, serotonin levels are high. That's a medical condition. That's a mental health condition that we can fix. Take this medication, take it twice a day, good to go. We'll adjust it, get it where it belongs. But then I think the rest of it goes back to, again, we were put on this earth to make some sort of impact, whether you're the entrepreneur, whether you're the trash man, whether you're the podcast host, whatever it is, everybody's put on this earth to do something. And I think that and having conversations is that's what we're lacking in society because people are so afraid of, how I say something, what am I going to say that's going to offend people? And I think we have that subsection of people that are like, I don't care what anybody thinks I'm going to say, but I truly believe that deep down, everybody definitely has people in their lives that they care what they're going to say and how people are going to react. But I feel like that's what we're missing as a society is just more, I don't know, maybe we're just in this one big ball of mental health and our interactions and how we go about our day and how people receive us. What is it? It costs nothing to smile. Like you see those to be nice. Like, and it's just, what if we did more of that? Like that has to have a profound effect, like on our mental health. And I feel like, and you got to put yourself in those situations too. Like I really believe like mental health is not a one-way road. Like it's nonlinear. It's a highway. It's just with lots of U-turns, with a lot of crosses in the road. Like you think you're going the right way and then you realize, nope, I should be going this way. And I think I think you have to understand that. And then how do you then begin just moving down the road? And I think that's where, support systems and, whatever that is, and not being so caught up in that you have to have all these friends that care about your mental health, but really just I think even as you grow, like you learn that you really only have a few best friends in life, right? Like we all have experienced that. But it's just, I think it's just this big ball of like mental health that,
Definitely.
somebody has the answer. I don't
Yeah.
have the answer, but somebody does.
It's a journey. And I feel like we're in a unique place because of like just the onset of the internet and social media and the way that we have access to things at our fingertips. I took classes in college where I had to write about the media desensitizing you to certain things, right? Because, the other day I was on Twitter, and Twitter is very like not filtered. You just see some pretty raw videos on there. And there was a video on there of like someone getting killed, someone losing their, and it's actual footage of like someone losing their life. And I actually had to like shut my phone off and like step away from my phone because it really impacted me, like to see that because of everything that you were describing earlier about this is a person that lived their entire life up to that point, a grown adult with family and a history and has existed here, and there's evidence of them existing here, and now they just don't exist here anymore. And I was like, it's not normal to just have access to this at our fingertips all the time and then scroll to the next video and it's a cat meme, or scroll to the next thing and it's a new song. Like it fucks with your brain. And there's research on it, on how like processing that many different emotions back to back to back at once is not good for you because you're not really feeling them. You're not really processing them. You're just moving on to the next thing, and it's not healthy. And I do feel like it's like people are just meaner than they've ever been because it's easy to be mean because you have the ability to say things online and be anonymous, or, you don't have to go out and socialize if you don't want. You can DoorDash things to your door. You can stay in your house and work remote. Like there's so many things that are disconnecting us from each other as people. And so as a result, we see each other with less humanity, and we think that we have less in common, and it just becomes easier to be mean. And I would say naturally I'm more pessimistic. Like I wouldn't say pessimistic, maybe realistic about how people are and how they work and human nature and things like that. But I am like you in that I'm an optimist when it comes to believing in the good of humanity, because I believe in a higher purpose. I believe in a higher power. I think that we do share things, much more things in common than we have differences. And I think that most people just want to like live a peaceful life, take care of their loved ones, do something that they love, connect with people. Like I believe that. And we just have different ways of going about it. And the world has us convinced that we're so different and so disconnected. Politics, like this is the whole reason for my podcast, So I think that affects mental health as a whole, like feeling disconnected from your neighbors, from your family, from your friends, from like romantic relationships. Like all of it affects your mental health because you start to feel like you can't have faith in people. So like kind of on that note, you have a career where you have to deal with traumatic things regularly. How do you balance like your relationships at home and with your family and your partner after you've experienced like a lifetime of trauma like this and witnessing others' trauma?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
And that's okay.
I don't know
I
don't know if I've figured that out yet. I can tell you by not processing it, what it does, right?
Yeah,
like causes
sure.
a lot of tension, causes a lot of discomfort in life, causes all these other crazy thoughts to get in your head. And so, it's easy for me to sit here and say, you have to have that. You have to have that outlet. You have to figure that out. And I think that's the crappy part. That's the part that sucks, is like trying to figure it out, right? And what works for you. And I think understanding that just because it worked for you in that moment doesn't mean that's the way to do it, right? Like people will tell you to go exercise, people will tell you to take walks, people will tell you to read books, they'll do all this sort of stuff. But I think for me, it's as confession time, like watching like reality show, right? Like watching reality TV and just going to a different world. And whether that's because I want to it would be great to be doing that. For example, like love watching like Below Deck, like, oh, it'd be great to be able to spend a life on a yacht. Or
Yeah.
how crazy would it be to work on the yacht? Like I could do that, like, and just remove yourself, or just how simple that might be, right? Or watch reality shows where people just make fools of themselves and you're just like, oh, my life's not that bad, or, it's not that bad of a situation for me. But obviously it's important finding that outlet. I can't sit here and tell you how you do it or how you go about it, because I don't know if have fully figured that out. But it's, I hate getting caught in the mantra of it's my job and it's my job, so I just deal with it, because I don't believe that. Like, to your point, like there's something to be said when you are repeatedly exposed to anything in life. And just because that's my job doesn't mean I have to be exposed to those things. Like, I didn't get into this job to see people, get shot at a music festival. I got into this job realizing that something of that magnitude could happen. And so I'm going to train, I'm going to, we're going to talk through it, how we're going to deal with it. And then if it happens, I'm going to go to work and do what I need to do to get handled. But to me, and I know, like, even as I kind of say that out loud, like, it sounds like I'm just being a hypocrite to, you got into this job because you really want to see the cool stuff. But on the flip side, it's not why you got into the job to deal with to deal with it. But there's something in there. There's some sort of line in there that, you have to be able to process that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, I believe that we're more than our jobs. Like, we're here to, that's a part of why we're here, and we can use our careers and our jobs as a way to impact people. But first and foremost, we're human beings and we're emotional beings. So nobody asks for trauma. Somebody has to be there to provide the care in those situations, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't take a toll on you. It doesn't mean that you don't like your job. It doesn't mean that you want to be doing anything differently. It doesn't mean you're not grateful for your position, but it just naturally has effects on you as a human being. And so, I believe that there should be, like, resources to deal with that. I don't know, does CAM have, like, mental health resources, or, like, after 1 October, did you guys do any kind of, like, debriefing or decompressing or therapy, or do they send out emails where they're like, if you need help, if you need to talk, like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, like, immediately after the 1 October incident, that night, that morning, so Monday morning, because it occurred on a Sunday night, the ownership of our organization made it a point to say, before, there was 21 of us that were there. So there was a handful of us that were working, and then there were some folks that were off duty just attending the concert. But naturally, just who they are and what they do, they went to work and stayed behind and helped. So there's 21 of us total, including myself. And so the owners wanted to just kind of do a quick check-in on everyone. And in my head, I'm like, I'm not checking in with anyone. Like, I'm good. And so I avoided the check-in. Was that a mistake? Maybe, maybe not. I went home that night. At the time, I was living alone. So, you can imagine, the nightmares that kind of were associated with that. And so, again, maybe not the best move, but in the coming days, one of the things we did was, again, brought in a psychologist, and that psychologist brought everybody into the room. For me personally, that wasn't helpful.
Right.
For me,
that's how I am too.
For me, as to be able to be there amongst my colleagues, my coworkers, some of which, were, people that reported to me, it was needed to be able to see that process, or to maybe to understand that we were all feeling something. Right. And I think, people were feeling things at different levels, and were starting to process things the way they were processing things. So I think that, again, being selfless, like that for me was needed to be able just to see, like, real emotion on people and to hear some people. But for me, just being in that room and then being asked the questions, that didn't help me. And that's just me. That's just how I was in that moment. So As an organization, yeah, we have employee assistance programs that are, 24-hour hotlines, and people often think that, those resources are strictly for, feeling suicidal or, whatever it may be. But in fact, they're there to, support, if you're having troubles in your relationship, if you're having troubles with, drugs, alcohol, that sort of thing, that resource is there. So we offer up that resource. Probably could do a better job collectively of making it known that those resources are there and those resources exist and they're good resources. So yeah, I mean, we immediately right out the gate, that was like our focus, was understanding the mental health. I don't know if we knew exactly how to navigate that. And if you were to ask me if something like that occurred today, how would we handle it differently? I think we would make some tweaks, but for us and for me, I think where we saw success, if that's what you want to call it, was when the opportunity existed for all of us just to be together. One of the things we had done was there's he happens to be a paramedic firefighter, and he takes photos of first responders. And there's a story behind all the photos that he takes, and a lot of it has to do with PTSD. And so he'll take these images and then he'll edit them. Everything from one of the photos that he took included, everybody's just kind of sharing their story of what happened that night. And one of the things that happened that night is that one of our owners who was home that then responded that night, him and then somebody from the fire department, they went in to officially pronounce the people that had been shot and killed on the grounds of the festival. And to this day, there was one where she had tears in her eyes, and her eyes were open. She was dead. And he closed her eyes. And so as we're sharing these stories, the photographer took a picture of him, and then the one of the deputy chiefs from the fire department. And if you look at the image, he has them posed and he edits it and that sort of stuff. But if you look closely, you can see the spirits of the people that they described. And so he does a lot of work there, and then he's able to it begins the conversation of talking about mental health amongst responders. And so naturally, to get the right photo and to do that, we got to get everybody together. And so we had an opportunity where we had gotten all 21 of us together. And it took a while to get the photos and get the right pose and to kind of line things up the way we want it to. But it was those hours together that for me, and I think for a lot of people, began kind of that healing process. It was that being together. And again, just being in community. And I think to me, that's a big step of mental health, is being in community. Who you're being in community with, I think, is part of what you have to navigate. But in that moment, it was being in community with those that just were there.
Yeah.
Right? There was a bond, a unique bond that was formed in that incident that nobody ever thought would form or, whatever. But it was in that moment and that community and that camaraderie that I think for me anyways began a lot of the healing and kind of the path forward.
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of things that came to mind as you were talking, but one of the worst things that you can do when you're experiencing trauma or depression is isolate, right? And that can be physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever the case may be. And a lot, especially for me personally, I struggle to reach out and ask for help when I really need it. And there's something healing about being around people where it's unspoken. Like, you don't have to talk, they just get it, because it takes energy to muster up and explain how you're feeling, especially if it's someone that's just not going to get it.
Or if you don't know how you feel, right?
Right.
I think, and that was, I think, part of my struggle with going to see a psychologist is you're asking me how I feel and you're asking me these questions. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how I feel. Like, is this a quiz? Is this a test? Like, right. I understand your focus and your purpose, but that was a lot of it for me, is like, it's exhausting, like, to share the story over and over. Like, there's power in being able to share the story, right? Because I do believe that by not sharing the story, by not telling others your experience, not, sharing, what we learned from it, what we didn't learn from it, like, to me, then the evil wins. Yeah. And that's that 1%. And like, we can't allow that 1% to consume the 99% of the joy that we have and the camaraderie that we have on this earth. Like you can't allow that.
Right.
And so you have to talk about it.
Right. And being around people that get it is like that camaraderie, like you're saying. Like when my grandpa passed away, all I wanted to do was be around my family. I didn't want to be around anybody else because, yeah, other people have lost people and they get it and they know the grief and they know the feeling, but no one knew my grandpa like my family. You know, like they know the specifics and the individual ways that I miss him, and they know like if a song comes on that he liked, we're all feeling it. We don't have to say it. Like we just know. And you can just mourn, and no one is trying to no one feels awkward. No one is like, oh, I don't know what to say to make them feel better. It's like, no, we just know that we're having this collective experience, and it's the opposite of isolation. Like even if you don't know exactly what to say, it's like just knowing that there's someone who's experiencing it with you and you're not crazy, and there's someone that's there for you in that way is healing in and of itself,
What a society we would live in if we could just
do that collectively.
It's a silence though, right? Like
Yeah.
people don't like silence. Silence is a little awkward, but there's power. There's so much is said in silence that I just don't, if we could just focus more on that and be okay with that.
Yeah. That's like the first thing I ask people when they're going through something or they come to me with something, whether they come to me or not. It's like, do you want to just sit with me? Like, do you want to just come over and we don't have to talk if you just want someone to be there, And then most times I found that when you're not pressing and prying and asking hey, how are you feeling? What's going on? It just comes out naturally when someone feels comfortable around you and they feel supported and loved. And I think most people don't really know what to say, which is normal, but sometimes just being there is enough, and the rest follows. Kind of wrapping up here, how has this career path changed your perspective on the world? Do you feel like it's made you more jaded in humanity? Has it made you more optimistic? Has it not really impacted you to that degree? How have you felt like your perspective of the world and humanity has changed because you've been in this community for so long?
Probably all the above.
Okay.
Right? It's quick and easy to become jaded, just because of just stuff we've talked about, just the level of bad in this world, right? And some of it understanding that when people pick up the call 911 and you go to their house, they're not having a good day. So you're interacting with people that just aren't having a good day or having a good moment. But I think that's where the strength in being able to, I don't even know how to describe it, but just kind of change your perspective and change your mentality, and just you have the ability to make somebody's day a little bit better, even in that dark moment. And I think that's what drives me. I spend a lot of time behind a desk and a lot of meetings nowadays, but what I have found is, and I'll tell people, the moment you feel like you're not learning something in this business or you feel like you're not helping people, then get out of it. Don't stay in it. I think we often kind of get in this feeling of being trapped where we're at in life. And it's hard to go do something different. It might be hard to move out. It might be hard to do this, but there's a path, and baby steps, bigger steps, whatever it is, we can open those doors and begin doing that. But no, I think, at the end of the day, I still believe that 99% of us on earth are just good humans and good people. And so I think that alone is reason why we should all be optimistic. And doesn't mean we can't have bad days, doesn't mean we can't have more pessimistic days, months, weeks. That's okay, as long as we don't get stuck in those ruts. And again, as long as we surround ourselves with that support system to be able to kind of get out of those ruts, and knowing that being in those ruts and not being okay is nothing wrong with that. And everybody needs that, and everybody's going to be on their own cycle. Everybody's going to be on their own, whatever it is. And I think if you're going through life and you're not having those downs, then I think you're just full of it. Like,
Yeah,
like it's
right.
just there's just
Just
no
not
way you're
acknowledging 'em.
like I love optimistic people, but even optimistic people have rough days, and
Right.
so just surround ourselves with people that want to do good. And again, 99% of those people mean good, want to do good, and find those people that you connect with and can click with, and just keep doing good.
Yeah. I think that's a nice, lighthearted way to end a heavy episode. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't cover or
No,
wanted
I
to
feel like we
mention?
could talk. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I don't think there's definitive answers. I don't think this is what you do, this is how you do it. I think for all of us, our journeys are going to be unique, and there's not a wrong way, there's not a right way. It's your way. You got to find your way, and there's people there that will help you find your way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy.
I appreciate
so
it.
thank you for coming on and talking about, something that can be heavy, for you, for other people, and providing insight for them. If any of you guys would like to continue the conversation with Glenn, or if you have any additional questions, I will have his contact information available on all my social media platforms. Thank you guys for listening as always, and I will see you in 2 weeks to talk more elephants.